There is an ancient military expression. It says, "To the victor goes the spoils." Now, what this meant in particular in ancient times is that if you were part of a military operation and your side were to be victorious, you overthrew a city, a town, an army, whatever, you got their stuff. You were able to go through and take whatever you wanted from the dead or the survivors or whatnot, and that meant gold, silver, equipment, slaves, didn't matter. In the ancient world, you got everything. And this was going to be extended somewhat into the political spectrum of 19th century America. Now, John Quincy Adams could have played this game. He could have gone through and have replaced individuals who were against him with people who were for him, but he decided to go the more honorable route and not play that game. Andrew Jackson did not have the same problem in regards to the spoils system as it came to be known. The spoils system came to be a hallmark, a trademark, if you will, of the Jackson administration, and it would continue on for quite a while after Andrew Jackson was no longer in office. Now, in a nutshell, the spoils system as it pertains to American politics, or I should say as it pertained, past tense, to American politics at this point in time, the spoils system rewarded your supporters with good positions in office. In other words, as you came into office, if you were the president, you had won the election, what you could then do was go through and appoint your people to some of the good jobs in office. That could be anywhere within the executive branch. Now, it didn't necessarily mean that the best person was getting the job or that the person who was losing their job actually deserved to lose it. All it meant was that as you came into office, you were eliminating your opponents from being in government while replacing them with people who were supposedly loyal to you. See, Andrew Jackson believed that yes, it was very true when it came to any kind of job or any kind of government position that experience did matter. Experience counted because the longer you had been at a job, the better you were able to understand how to do that job. So he believed experience counted, but he believed that loyalty, young blood, and sharp eyes counted even more. He believed that you rewarded those who had been loyal to you. You were loyal to those who had been loyal to you. So you're rewarding that loyalty, and as a result, you're helping build on that loyalty. The people that he would be putting into office would then be dependent upon Jackson to stay in office, and therefore they would work even harder to make sure that he stayed in office. Okay, young blood, that vitality of youth would go through and would shake things up. Sharp eyes, the ability to see what was happening and therefore report it back to the powers that be. These things counted more. And as such, as soon as Andrew Jackson took over as president, he went about the process of overhauling pretty much as many positions as possible and erasing all the old blood that was there. Now, keep in mind that when Andrew Jackson came into office, this was a new party taking over from an older party. Okay, this was not, in today's parlance, it wouldn't be a Democrat taking over for a Democrat or a Republican taking over for a Republican. This would be a change. This would be a Republican taking over from a Democrat, for example. Now, it wasn't since the election of 1800, when Thomas Jefferson came into office, that a new party had been voted into the presidency. And even back then, in 1800, most of the positions had stayed. They had not been changed. It was not a common occurrence to go through and totally upend the civil service. It was not customary to go through and replace people who were competent at their jobs, who had experience at their jobs, and replace them with people who had never done it before. Even as recent in our argument here as John Quincy Adams. Remember, we said before there were only a few dozen, maybe a dozen jobs or so that he really replaced. He was not going to play the patronage game. And while that had been a growing issue and a growing area of, possibly defending yourself or entrenching you and your party into the government, it was still not that common. Now, I said previously that when Andrew Jackson took over as president, this was going to be a radical change within the government. And you're going to see that here in regards to the spoils system. We said before, Jackson believed experience counted, but he believed that loyalty counted even more so. Now, if we're going to be honest, when Andrew Jackson comes into office, he really wanted to wipe the slate clean. He wanted to get rid of every single person within government that he could and replace them with folks that he saw as being loyal to him and his party. He really did want to basically start over from scratch if that was at all possible. However, only about 1 out of 5, 20%, were sent home. But think about that. That's essentially saying 20% of the government, 20% of the people who actually make sure that what's happening in the government continues, that the paperwork gets done, that the issues that are brought about, the laws put into place by Congress actually get carried out. 20% of them are going to be sent home. And what's more, clean sweeps would come later. It would get to a point that there were those times that quite literally everyone who could be let go would be let go. Those would come later, however. There were always people who were hounding Jackson for positions. There were always those job seekers that were, it might not be the best way to say that they were demanding that he give them some kind of position, but they really felt that they had earned it due to their party loyalty. So there were always those pushing for Jackson to get rid of more people so that they could get the job. And what's more, those who were discharged, a lot of them, they had no reason to have been let go. And this is a time frame when there was no social safety net. There was no such thing as unemployment or anything like that. And so you have people who have been working in the government for quite a while now being let go without cause and with no real prospects for any other job that they can now pick up. More than one went mad. They actually lost their minds. More than one committed suicide. And even those who didn't, they still had a really tough time. Now, the argument in favor of patronage was that this was just part of the game. This was just how it was played. And that when an opponent of Jackson would get elected, that they would go through and do the exact same thing to the Jacksonians. But I would have to argue that, the question comes up, then does that mean two wrongs make a right? In this case, as they go through, they are going to get rid of competent people for incompetent people. You're going to end up with a civil service that is corrupt, a civil service that is incompetent, and oftentimes you're going to get people working for the government that are flat out lazy and don't want to do it. They just want some kind of a paycheck because they were one of Jackson's guys, kind of thing. So you're really not setting up the government to win, and you're not providing the kind of services that the American people are going to need by going through and getting rid of everybody as soon as there is some kind of change in government. Okay? The thing is, the spoils system denied a large number of able people the chance to actually contribute. And when you think about it, if we do have a government that is rife with corruption, that is rife with incompetence and whatnot, you're really looking at a government that's not going to be able to move forward. Or at least it's going to move forward in a very, very slow manner. This is a point in time when the United States is growing quite rapidly in terms of population. And the government is not going to be able to actually support the people they're there for because they don't have competent people running the government. This is a system that is going to really entrench itself, and it's going to take a long time, and eventually, believe it or not, several years down the road, there will be a presidential assassination that actually will help trigger the change. But for the meantime, Jackson is in power, and his people are going to be getting the jobs that they want. Now, here's a name I am quite certain it has just been on the tip of your mind since this class began. I know in my heart that from the moment you decided you were going to take AP US history, it was because you wanted to speak about Samuel Swartwout. Now, I am quite confident, in all honesty, that many of you just heard that name and thought, what are you talking about? Samuel Swartwout is sort of the epitome of why the spoils system was not a good idea. Now, we talked about laziness, we talked about incompetence, and we talked about corruption. I think it would be hard to argue that Mr. Swartwout was incompetent, and I think it would be difficult to argue that he was lazy. He was quite good at his job. It's just the job at which he was good wasn't exactly the job to which he was assigned, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Samuel Swartwout had been given the very lucrative post of collector of the customs of the Port of New York. So you think about it. His job is overseeing the books and overseeing all of the taxes for every item that is imported into New York. Remember, we still have a tariff at this time, and the tariff is a sizable percentage of whatever's coming in. We talked about tariffs before. Let's say it's a 10% tariff. You're buying something that costs you $1. The tariff, the tax essentially is going to be another 10 cents. Okay, that 10 cents goes to the government. Mr. Swartwout, his job is to make sure all that money gets collected and handed over to the government. However, now he had nearly 9 years in this job. At the end of these 9 years, since this was essentially a political appointment, on the one hand, he was fairly confident that he was going to be replaced by somebody else. But that's not the reason he fled to England. He fled to England because after 9 years, his books weren't exactly right. The numbers did not add up, ladies and gentlemen, and it wasn't so much that he was bad at math. Apparently, he must have been quite good at math, because he becomes the first person in the history of the world to have stolen more than $1 million from the U.S. government. He had embezzled over the course of time more than $1 million. When he fled to England, he went with him carrying a good amount of money with which he could live a pretty good life afterwards. $1 million today would still be a good chunk of money. But back in this time frame, it is quite literally a phenomenal amount of money. $1 million at that point is the equivalent of about $25 million today. Think about how much you could do with $25 million. And this is what Mr. Swartwout was able to depart with. He leaves for England, never to return, with probably literally a suitcase full of money, or if not a trunk. The spoils system itself, ladies and gentlemen, was built up by gifts from expectant party members. Okay? People worked for the party. They donated to the party, and they did so with the tacit understanding that they would get a nice, comfortable, not really difficult government job when all was said and done. And this system had dug itself in so deeply to the American political thought process that it would take 50 years before the grip was loosened. Okay, it wouldn't be until after the assassination of James Garfield that we started to see some serious changes to the civil service. Of course, by that point in time, it would be the late 1800s, and we would be in a vastly different world. But for the meantime, this was the way things were, and that was just the way things were going to be for now.